You just told her you can't see her tonight. You have plans, other priorities, and immediately, without her even asking, you launch into explanation. Who you're seeing, what you're doing, why it matters, how you'll make it up to her. Word after word, justification after justification, bleeding your power onto the floor while she watches you shrink. Not because she demanded it, but because something inside you can't tolerate her potential disapproval. This is the disease killing your attraction. Not your looks, not your money, not your status. Your compulsive need to justify your existence, to explain your choices, to rationalize your feelings, to seek permission for being who you are. Every explanation you offer without being asked is a confession of weakness. Every justification is a surrender of power. Every defensive word is proof that her opinion matters more than your reality. You think you're being considerate. You think you're being transparent. You think you're being a good partner. But what you're actually being is psychologically submissive. You're announcing that your choices aren't valid without her approval, that your feelings need her validation, that your existence requires her permission, and nothing kills attraction faster than a man who needs permission to be himself. Watch how it happens. She mentions she's free Friday, and you immediately explain why you can't meet her, listing every detail of your prior commitment like you're in court. She texts "okay," and you send paragraphs interpreting what she might be feeling, explaining your position, justifying your existence. She goes quiet, and you fill that quiet with words, each one a nail in the coffin of her respect for you. You're not communicating, you're bleeding. And she's watching you hemorrhage authority with every unnecessary word. The pattern is always the same. You make a decision, then immediately doubt it needs defending. You state a boundary, then instantly soften it with explanation. You express a feeling, then quickly rationalize why it's valid, as if your truth needs a legal brief, as if your existence needs footnotes, as if being yourself requires her signed approval. This isn't love, it's psychological servitude, and deep down, beneath all your explanations, you know it. This need to explain yourself isn't just a bad habit. It's a symptom of a psychological wound so deep you don't even know it's there. Every time you justify without being asked, you're revealing that somewhere, at some point, you learned that being yourself wasn't enough, that your feelings were wrong, that your choices were suspect, that your very existence needed external validation to have value. Watch yourself do it. She raises an eyebrow and you launch into defense mode. She goes quiet and you fill the silence with explanations. She seems disappointed and you scramble to justify. Not because she asked, not because she accused, but because her mere emotional state triggers your psychological submission. You've become so disconnected from your own authority that her feelings dictate your behavior. This is self-betrayal at its core. Every unnecessary explanation is you betraying your own truth for her comfort. Every justification is you abandoning your position for her approval. Every defensive word is you saying, "I'm not enough as I am, but maybe with enough explanation I can become acceptable." And she feels this. She feels your weakness, your need, your fundamental disconnection from yourself. And it repulses her at a level deeper than thought. The viral truth nobody wants to admit. Women aren't attracted to men who need their approval. They're attracted to men who approve of themselves so completely that external validation becomes irrelevant. The man who explains himself constantly is advertising his inadequacy. The man who stands in his truth without justification is demonstrating his power. Think about the last time you saw a truly confident man interact with a woman. Did he explain his choices? Did he justify his preferences? Did he defend his decisions before anyone attacked them? Number. He stated his reality and let it stand. He expressed his truth and let others adjust. He lived his life and let others decide if they wanted to participate. That's the energy that creates attraction, not the desperate scramble of explanation you're offering like a sacrifice to the goddess of approval. This goes beyond simple conversation. It's about the fundamental orientation of your psyche. Are you sourcing your validity internally or externally? Are you the author of your reality, or are you seeking co-authors? Are you living from your center or from her reactions? Every explanation you offer without request is an announcement of where your power lives. And if it lives in her approval, you've already lost the game you're trying to win through words. This started before you even knew who you were. Every time you expressed a feeling and heard, "You're exaggerating." Every time you stated a need and heard, "That's nonsense." Every time you showed emotion and heard, "You're too sensitive." Your developing psyche received the message loud and clear. Your internal experience isn't valid without external approval. So you learned to explain, to justify why you felt sad, to rationalize why you were angry, to prove why your needs mattered. You became a lawyer arguing for your right to exist, a salesman pitching your emotions for approval, a beggar asking permission to be human, and this pattern became so embedded that now, decades later, you're still doing it. Still explaining, still justifying, still seeking permission from every woman who triggers that ancient fear of invalidation. Your parents didn't mean to break you. Your teachers thought they were helping. Your religious leaders believed they were guiding you. But what they were actually doing was installing software that makes you subordinate to external authority. They were programming you to distrust your own experience, to doubt your own truth, to require outside validation for inside reality. And that programming is still running, making you explain yourself to women who never asked for an explanation. The unconscious transmission goes deeper. You watched your father explain himself to your mother. You saw your mother justify herself to society. You observed adults constantly seeking approval, constantly explaining, constantly abandoning themselves for acceptance. And you learned that this is what relationships look like. This is how humans interact. This is the price of connection. Except it's not connection, it's submission disguised as intimacy. Consider how early this training began. Before you could even speak properly, you were being conditioned to distrust your instincts. Hungry? No, you just ate. Tired? It's not bedtime yet. Scared? There's nothing to be afraid of. Your most basic biological signals were overridden by external authority, and you learned that your body lies, your feelings deceive, your instincts can't be trusted. Only external authority knows truth. This creates a split in the psyche that most men never heal. One part knows what it feels, wants, needs. Another part immediately doubts, questions, seeks confirmation. And between these two parts, in that gap of uncertainty, lives the compulsion to explain, to bridge the gap with words, to justify the unjustifiable disconnect between who you are and who you think you need to be. Every explanation is an attempt to reconcile this split, but the split can't be healed with words, only with the courage to trust yourself again. Living this way isn't just unattractive, it's psychologically devastating. When you require external validation for internal reality, you become a slave to others' opinions. Your self-esteem becomes a stock market, rising and falling based on her moods. Your identity becomes a performance, constantly adjusted for audience approval. Your life becomes a movie where you're an actor reading lines instead of a human being living truth. The loss of internal authority means you no longer trust yourself. You don't trust your feelings without her confirmation. You don't trust your decisions without her agreement. You don't trust your very existence without her approval. You've outsourced your authority to someone who never asked for it and doesn't want it. And this creates the exact dynamic that destroys relationships. Every compulsive explanation is submission. You're submitting to her emotional state. You're submitting to her potential judgment. You're submitting to her imagined disapproval. And submission from a man triggers contempt in women. Not because they're cruel, but because they're biologically programmed to be repulsed by weakness in their mate. Your explanations aren't creating understanding, they're creating disgust. This leads directly to neurosis, anxiety, existential crisis. You're constantly exhausted because performing for approval is exhausting. You're constantly anxious because approval can be withdrawn at any moment. You're constantly in crisis because you don't know who you are without external validation. You're not living your life. You're living a performance of what you think will get you loved. And that performance is killing both your authenticity and her attraction. The energy drain is real and measurable. Every explanation requires mental energy to craft, emotional energy to deliver, psychological energy to monitor its reception. You're burning through your life force trying to manage her perceptions instead of living your truth. And this depletion shows in your posture, in your eyes, in your voice. You become hollow, desperate, needy. Not because you are these things, but because you're hemorrhaging energy trying to be acceptable. Women sense this depletion immediately. They feel the vacuum where your self-authority should be. They recognize the performance, the desperation, the fundamental dishonesty of a man who won't stand in his truth. And even if they don't consciously understand what they're sensing, their attraction evaporates. Because attraction requires presence. and you can't be present when you're constantly explaining yourself. You're either here, fully here, as yourself, or you're in your head crafting explanations, and she knows the difference. Fear drives every unnecessary explanation. Fear of her anger, fear of her disappointment, fear of her leaving. But deeper than that, fear of being alone with yourself, fear of standing in your truth without support, fear of existing without permission. You explain because if she rejects your explanation, at least it's not you being rejected. It's just your words, your justification, your performance. Never the real you, because the real you never shows up. You're trying to control her perception because you can't control your own self-worth. Every explanation is an attempt to manage her thoughts, to direct her feelings, to puppeteer her approval. But this isn't connection, it's manipulation. You're manipulating her into approving of you because you can't approve of yourself. And she senses this manipulation, this weakness, this fundamental dishonesty, and it destroys any chance of genuine attraction. The desire to belong overrides your need to be authentic. You'd rather be accepted as false than rejected as real. You'd rather maintain the relationship through explanation than risk losing it through truth. But relationships built on explanation aren't relationships. They're contracts where you constantly renegotiate your right to exist, where you pay for acceptance with pieces of your soul. Your ego has become subservient to external acceptance. It no longer serves your true self, but serves the goal of being liked, approved, chosen. And this servitude shows in every unnecessary word, every defensive explanation, every justification you offer to someone who didn't ask. You've become your own prosecuting attorney, arguing against yourself before anyone else even accuses you. The mechanism is insidious because it feels like communication. You think you're being open, honest, vulnerable. But there's a difference between chosen vulnerability and compulsive explanation. One comes from strength, the other from weakness. One is a gift, the other is a plea. One builds intimacy, the other destroys respect. And most men can't tell the difference because they've been explaining themselves for so long they think it's normal. Notice how you feel after explaining yourself. Relieved? Temporarily. But then comes the shame. The recognition that you've done it again, given away your power again, sought approval again. And each time you do it, you respect yourself a little less. She respects you a little less. The relationship becomes a little more imbalanced. Until you're so depleted, so resentful, so disgusted with yourself that the relationship implodes. Not because of what she did, but because of what you kept doing to yourself. The compulsive need to explain yourself is the ego disconnected from the self. It's the false you trying to protect itself through words because the real you isn't present to protect through being. When you're disconnected from your authentic self, you need constant explanation to bridge the gap. When you're connected to your truth, explanation becomes unnecessary because your presence communicates everything. Individuation means reclaiming your internal authority, not becoming stubborn or rigid, but becoming whole, complete, sovereign over your own experience. It means trusting your feelings without requiring external validation. It means making choices without needing approval. It means existing without apology. This isn't arrogance, it's authenticity. It's the opposite of compulsive justification. Silence becomes your most powerful tool, not sulking silence, not punitive silence, but the silence of internal authority, the silence that says I've made my choice and I don't need to defend it, the silence that says I feel what I feel and it doesn't require your agreement, the silence that says I am who I am and that's enough. This silence communicates more strength than 1,000 explanations ever could. When you stop explaining, you start becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you need to be, becoming solid instead of fluid, becoming real instead of performed. And this becoming changes everything, not just how she sees you, but how you see yourself, how you move through the world, how you experience your own existence. The journey from self-abandonment to wholeness isn't linear. You'll catch yourself mid-explanation and have to stop. You'll send the text, then wish you hadn't. You'll justify something, then feel the familiar shame. But each time you notice, you're awakening. Each time you stop mid-sentence, you're choosing yourself. Each time you delete the explanation before sending, you're building internal authority. This is how transformation happens. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small choices to stop betraying yourself. The resistance you'll face is intense. Every part of you conditioned to explain will scream that you're being rude, cold, distant. Your inner child will panic that you'll be abandoned. Your ego will insist that explanation is necessary for connection. But push through this resistance and you'll discover something revolutionary. The people who matter don't need your explanation, and the people who demand it don't matter. This isn't about becoming an island, it's about becoming a mountain. Solid, grounded, unmoved by every emotional weather pattern that passes by. The moment you stop justifying yourself unnecessarily, reality shifts. She tests with her emotions and you don't explain. She creates distance and you don't chase with words. She expresses disappointment and you don't scramble to justify. And something magical happens. She starts seeing you differently. Not as someone she can manipulate through moods, but as someone solid, someone real, someone worth respecting. Internally, choosing not to justify triggers radical changes. Your self-trust strengthens because you're finally trusting yourself. Your confidence grows because you're no longer seeking permission. Your presence intensifies because you're no longer diluting it with explanations. You become magnetic not through effort but through authenticity, through the simple act of being who you are without apology. Relationally, everything destabilizes, then reorganizes. Manipulative dynamics collapse because manipulation requires your participation through explanation. Control-based patterns dissolve because control needs your submission through justification. What remains are relationships based on respect, not fear, on choice, not neediness, on truth, not performance. The initial discomfort is part of awakening. When you first stop explaining, anxiety floods in. Ancient fears surface. You feel naked without your defensive explanations. But this discomfort is withdrawal from an addiction. Addiction to approval, to validation, to external permission to exist. Push through this discomfort and you find something revolutionary. You don't die without approval, you become more alive. The change in how women respond to you is immediate and dramatic. The same woman who seemed to need constant explanation suddenly respects your silence. She stops pushing for justification because she senses it won't come. She stops using emotional manipulation because it no longer works. She either steps up to meet you at your new level of authenticity or she leaves. Either way, you win. Because a relationship based on your truth is better than one based on your performance. Watch how her behavior transforms when you stop feeding her need for control through explanation. She becomes more feminine because you're finally being masculine. She becomes more trusting because you're finally trustworthy. She becomes more attracted because you're finally attractive. Not because you changed tactics, but because you changed fundamentally. You stopped being a boy seeking mommy's approval and became a man standing in his truth. And this shift changes everything about how she experiences you. Small actions create massive shifts. Saying no without justifying why. Feeling sad without explaining the reason. Making choices without seeking permission. Having boundaries without defending them. Each small act of non-explanation builds your internal authority. Each moment of chosen silence strengthens your connection to self. Non-reactivity becomes your superpower. She gets upset and you don't explain. She questions your choices and you don't justify. She pushes for reasons and you simply state your position without defense. This isn't stonewalling, it's sovereignty. You're responding from your center, not reacting from your wounds. You're operating from wholeness, not from the fragmented need for approval. Your presence alone starts communicating what words never could. Integrity, wholeness, authenticity radiate from someone who doesn't compulsively explain. You become coherent, aligned, integrated. Your inner and outer worlds match. What you feel, think, say, and do all come from the same source, your true self. Not the performed self that needs constant explanation, but the real self that needs no justification. This integrity communicates without words. Women feel it before you speak. They sense the solidity, the self-trust, the internal authority. And this triggers attraction at a primal level, not because you're playing games, but because you're finally not playing games. You're being real. And real is rare. Real is attractive. Real is what they've been searching for without knowing how to name it. The daily practice extends beyond romantic relationships. You stop explaining yourself to friends who question your choices, to family who challenge your decisions, to colleagues who probe your boundaries. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to practice internal authority. to choose whether explanation is necessary or compulsive, to discern between genuine communication and defensive justification. And with each choice to remain solid in your truth without explanation, you build the kind of presence that commands respect without demanding it. Start with the small moments. When she asks why you're going to the gym instead of watching TV with her, just say "I'm going to the gym" without the elaborate explanation about health and goals and schedule. When she questions why you're seeing your friends, just confirm you're seeing your friends without justifying why you need male companionship. When she probes about your mood, acknowledge it without explaining its origin. These small acts of non-explanation build the muscle of internal authority that eventually becomes your default state. When you stop seeking approval through explanation, life transforms. Anxiety decreases because you're no longer performing for acceptance. Self-perception strengthens because you're finally seeing yourself through your own eyes. Energy shifts from defensive to creative, from justifying the past to building the future. You stop leaking power through unnecessary words and start building presence through chosen silence. The external world responds to this shift immediately. People who required your explanation disappear because you're no longer feeding their need for control. Manipulative dynamics collapse because you're not participating. New relationships emerge based on respect for who you are, not who you pretend to be. You become magnetic without trying because authenticity is inherently magnetic. Women especially respond to this change. The same woman who seemed to need your constant explanation suddenly respects your silence. The one who pushed for justification suddenly accepts your choices. The one who used emotional manipulation suddenly finds it doesn't work. Not because she changed, but because you did. You stopped participating in the dance of explanation and submission. You filter relationships naturally now. People either accept you without explanation or they leave. And their leaving isn't loss, it's clarity. It's the trash taking itself out. It's incompatible energies recognizing incompatibility. What remains are people who respect your sovereignty because they have their own, who don't need your explanation because they trust your judgment, who meet you as equals, not as prosecutor and defendant. Your energy becomes your own again. Instead of spending it crafting explanations, you invest it in creation. Instead of defending your past, you build your future. Instead of justifying your feelings, you feel them fully. Instead of explaining your choices, you make better ones. The energy previously wasted on seeking approval becomes available for actually living. And this shift in energy allocation changes everything about what you're capable of achieving. The respect you gain from others is nothing compared to the respect you gain from yourself. Every time you stand in your truth without explanation, you prove to yourself that you can. Every time you maintain boundaries without justification, you strengthen your self-trust. Every time you choose silence over defensive words, you choose yourself over approval. And these choices compound into a completely different relationship with yourself. You become someone you respect, someone you trust, someone you'd want to be around. And that internal shift manifests externally in ways you never imagined possible. What explanation do you repeat the most? What justification has become your script? What defense do you offer before anyone attacks? These patterns reveal where you've abandoned yourself, where you've decided your truth isn't enough, where you've chosen performance over presence, and recognizing these patterns is the first step to breaking them. Ask yourself, who am I without explanation? Who am I when I'm not justifying? Who am I when I stand in my truth without defense? This person, this unexplained, unjustified, unapologetic you. That's who you actually are. That's who she's waiting to meet. That's who the world needs you to become. Not perfect, not flawless, just real, just whole, just unapologetically present. The transformation isn't comfortable. Becoming real never is. You'll lose people who needed your weakness. You'll threaten those who required your submission. You'll confuse those who knew only your performance, but you'll gain something worth more than all of them combined. Yourself. Your real self. Your whole self. Your sovereign self that needs no external permission to exist. This is the secret that changes everything. When you stop explaining yourself to women, you stop needing them to validate you. When you stop needing their validation, you become attractive. When you become attractive through authenticity rather than performance, you attract what's real rather than what's convenient, and real connection based on truth rather than explanation. That's worth more than 1,000 relationships built on justification. Consider the man you could become if you stopped explaining yourself starting today. the energy you'd reclaim, the respect you'd command, the attraction you'd generate, the peace you'd experience. This isn't a fantasy. It's the natural result of stopping the bleed of constant explanation, of closing the wound of needing approval, of healing the split between who you are and who you pretend to be. Every explanation you don't give is a step toward this version of yourself. The final truth is this: the women in your life, especially the one you're trying to impress with explanations, she doesn't want your justifications. She wants your truth. She doesn't want your performance. She wants your presence. She doesn't want your submission. She wants your strength. And you can't give her any of these while you're busy explaining yourself. So stop. Stop explaining. Stop justifying. Stop seeking permission to exist. Start being. Start standing in your truth. Start living from your center. And watch how everything changes when you finally choose yourself over approval. Stop explaining. Start being. Watch how she changes. Watch how you change. Watch how everything changes when you finally choose yourself over approval, truth over performance, silence over justification. This isn't just dating advice. This is psychological revolution. This is reclaiming your soul from the auction block of external validation. If this message hits where you live, if these words expose patterns you've been blind to, share this with other men who need to hear it. Like this video if it revealed the explanation addiction you didn't know you had. Subscribe for more unfiltered truth about psychology, relationships, and the patterns keeping you stuck. Because someone needs to say what millions are experiencing but nobody's discussing. The transformation begins the moment you stop explaining and start existing.